the most scary module in all of Make.com, the Array Iterator and Aggregator. Now, if you're new to Make.com, these two modules are the ones that will cause you the most stress, the most confusion. I get so many emails and questions about how to use these. Now, they're actually pretty simple modules once you understand the basics behind them. Essentially, what we've got here is we've got a way to separate each item in a list and then process each item individually. And then we've got the mirror opposite of that. We've got a way to combine multiple items into a list, into one thing, a list that holds multiple items. So let's have a look at how this actually looks in the data. Now, for my example here, I've got an array of contacts. There's multiple words that people throw around for arrays, including array, list, CSV, comma separated value. There's also many different words that you might hear for an item. You might hear item, you might hear an object, you might hear a collection or a data packet. Sometimes people confuse items with arrays, and that's usually the main confusion that people have. So an array is a list of things. And here we've got an array of contacts. Now, in this array, in this list, we've got 3 items. Now, you can have as many items as you like in a list. Now, each item has certain properties. So for our example, we've got 4 fields across all the items. They should always have the same properties across each item. That doesn't mean the values in each of those fields is the same. It means that the actual field holding the data is the same. Now, sometimes those fields get dropped. And so, for instance, if we didn't know Tom's gender, then we might not have the field or the value showing there. And that might be true for Harry as well. All right, and so certain data might get dropped, but if the data existed, it would still sit within the same data structure. Occasionally, you'll get some very messy lists and data where they jumble up the data structure. So here we've got an array of contacts. We've got 3 items. Now, we can also have an array with an array within it. Normally, how that would be structured would be an array with a list of items, and then within the item, we would have a field which holds another list of things. So in this example, we've got an array of contacts. We have 3 contacts, 3 objects in that array. And then for each of those objects, we have a list of favorite foods for each of those people. Now, there's actually a difference here in these 2 types of arrays. The first one is what's called a complex array. And it's complex because it's not just a simple comma-separated list of strings or of text. It's actually a list of objects, of things. And each object has multiple properties that represent that object. So here we've got a contact object, and within that contact, we've got a field for name. We have a field for the age, and then we might have a field for hair color, which would normally look something like this, green. And then we've got another field for a list of favorite foods. Now, each contact has the same field, and that's what makes it a complex array, because it's holding multiple data within the same object. Now, we've got another type of array here, which is called a simple array. And the difference is really a simple array just holds one piece of data for each item. A complex array holds multiple pieces of data for each item. Now, how that looks in terms of the actual data when it gets written, for our complex array, our data will look something like this. So we'll have generally an opening bracket to open our object, which holds the thing, and we'll just call this contact. That contact, which is the field name, will, in this case, have a list, and a list is quite easy to see in the data structure because it's always got square brackets. Now, within that list, we're going to have an array of objects. Now, an object always has these curly brackets around it. And within that object, now we have a list of fields. So we would have name as the first field. And within there, we have Tom. And then we have another field for age, 36. Then we might have hair color, and that would be, say, brown. And then we'd have our list of favorite foods. And that in itself is a list as well. And then we've closed the object out here. So within our contact list, we have objects, and that's within the 2 curly brackets. Now, if there were multiple objects, that data would be repeated, but the values would change. So these would be, let's say, Harry here, and Harry was 32, and he has blonde hair, and has also an empty list of favorite foods. Now, for Susan has a list of food. So we'll just assume she's the same properties there, but now we have her food list, apple, banana, and orange. And that is a simple array. So how that would be represented would be basically a comma-separated list. So we've got apple, comma, banana, comma, orange. Now, what's important here is the quotation marks. Whenever we've got a string, a text value, we always need to encase that with quotation marks so that we know that it's a text value. Numbers are special in that they can just be separate outside of the quotation marks. And then we've got other things like Booleans, which are true, false, etc. So there's certain ways that certain data needs to be structured. So you can see here we've got our list starting with our square bracket, and our list ends here with our closing square bracket. And we should also close our parent group, because that's our opening bracket there. And we can see we've got our last object in the list, our second last, and then our first object. Now between them, we've got our comma between the objects, but there's no comma at the end object, and that's because there's nothing coming after it. If we put a comma at the end, well, now when the JSON, which is what we've written, gets read, the system doesn't know what to do. It says we've told it something else is coming after this, but then we haven't given it any properties to read, so then it just throws an error. Okay, so now we've got our data structure. Let's have a look at how that translates into make.com. So we were able to just paste our string in here, and here I've just formatted the JSON here. That also checks to see that our JSON is of the correct structure, and the formatted JSON is actually a lot easier to read. So here, if we're starting out, we've got our object. Then within our object, we have our contact list. And then here I can expand and open my list. And now I've got 3 items or objects within the list. And then for each of those items, I can see I've got the data there for each of those. So I'm going to copy that structured data, paste it into this module. And then here I can see I've got my incoming data, which is just text. And then make has then correctly read that text and created a collection, which is an object or a thing. And then within that object, there is a list of our contact list. Now, if we expand out this list of arrays of favorite foods, we can see the first 2 are empty. And then this third one we can see has apple, banana, and orange. Now we've got the correct data here to play with. Let's start connecting it up to our modules. So here I'm going to drag and drop the iterator to our JSON module, and I'm going to put the array into the iterator. Now what that's going to allow us to do is it's going to split apart those 3 contacts. So if I run that now, we can see that here the output is a list of contacts. So I want to process each contact individually because I want to create a contact or look up a contact, something like that. Then the output, I've actually got 3 collections. So what Make has done is it basically slices that list up. There's 3 items in the list. I'm going to separate those items into separate things in the scenario. So now I can process bundle 1 or item 1, then I can do bundle 2, and then I can do bundle 3. I'm just going to set a variable here, and I'm just going to put name, and we will then map from our iteration module. Now, here we can see that we've got our values exposed for each of those records. And this is where a lot of people get confused because they think that only the first item has been exposed. They try to map it without the iteration, and they try to map it here. They say, okay, I want to map the first item, say for the contact, and they just expand out the list and they go, I want the name of that contact. So let's see how that works in this logic. So I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with using the iteration here instead. So let's run that here. Here we've got an indication of how many bundles of data went through each of those modules. Here we've got one bundle was output from this first module, and we have our 3 contacts in it. Here we've only got one output from our second module. And that's because when we asked for the name, or when we mapped the name from the contact list, what we're actually saying here is we're saying map the first contact or the first object from this list and tell me its name. You could put in the age, the hair color, happy, etc. You would just need to change the output like so, and then you'd get the hair color instead of the name, for instance. However, the problem there is that now we're only returning the first item in that array. If we always wanted to return the second or the third item, we could do that. We just put a number 2 between those brackets. And if I run that a second time, now we should get Harry because he's our second item. And we can confirm that by looking at our contact list. Tom is number 1, Harry is number 2. So you can manually map from an array using this if you want. However, if you want to access everything in the array, it would be very tedious to create all of these separately. So you can see the first one I asked for value 2, I got Harry. Second one I asked for value 1, I got Tom. And the third one I asked for value 3, I got Susan, right? So that's how you can call a specific value from within an array without having to iterate the entire array if you are always going to call the first or the second, whatever position it is in that list. Now that is quite helpful for things like Calendly or Acuity do this with their call booking. They return a list of form fields, and the form field is returned and it gives a question and an answer. If you want to get the results from the form, you have to iterate through the form fields to get the results. But you could also just call, okay, I know item number 1 is the name, item number 2 is the phone number, item number 3 is the email, etc. So you can just hard map it that way if you want. Now let's have a look at what we got from our iterator, because the actual output is slightly different here. So first we had our calling of a specific object within the array. Then we iterated that array here, which means that now we've split that list out into individual objects. Now, if we look at our explain flow here, we can see we've got a list icon, and it goes here, and then it splits out into 3 data icons, and then each of those objects then process to the variable. So that's why we had 3 outputs here. Now, output 1 was the first item in the list, Tom. Output 2 was the second, and output 3 was Susan. So if we wanted to, for instance, map all the contacts into our database, we could iterate through the list of things, and then we would have our create or update module here. Now, you may only want to create or update certain things, so you can filter each of those items along the way. So here we'll just say where the age is equal to 32, then tell me the name of the contact. So we'll run that here. And you can see 2 contacts have the age is 32 and 1 contact does not. And we can confirm that in the data here, age 32, age 32. So we should have Harry and Susan returned in our variable, and Tom should not be returned because he's 36. And here we've got Harry and we've got Susan. So you can add your filters here. You could also do routers on this route here as well. So you can add those filters and those routers to then process each contact or each object individually in the logic. But what happens if you've processed your data and then you want to combine it back? So let's just say we want to change the name. We want to lowercase the name here. So we'll just say lowercase, and I will map the name into the lowercase formula. And then I'm going to aggregate that data back together. So here I'm going to select my source module. Now the source module for the array aggregator is always going to be the module that does the split, because you want to make sure that you're capturing everything from when it was split to when you're combining it back again. So we'll select iterator here. So now let's run that. You can see we processed each name to lowercase from uppercase. Then our output here is going to be lowercase names. Now, why was that? Well, that's because we changed the mapping of the name from the original, which was uppercase, to this adjusted one, which was name here in lowercase. Let's have a look at another type of aggregation here. We'll look at the tools and we'll look at the number aggregator. So here, the number aggregator works pretty much the same as the normal aggregator, except it can only aggregate numbers. So here we're going to do the same thing of aggregating from the iteration. And here we've got the option of what function we want to do. So let's do an average of the ages. So we map from our iteration module the age into this aggregation module. And now when it runs, it's going to give us the average of those 3 ages. We can see we've got our average here, which is 33.3. Now, interestingly, we can see that we just have one bubble here and one bubble here, even though 3 items passed through this route here. And that's because nothing happened in between. We just simply split them up and then aggregated them back together to then get the average. If I was to keep the variable in the middle, we'll say age, and we'll do some sort of fancy math on the age and just say age plus 5. And then we aggregate not the age from this list, but we actually aggregate the age plus 5, which should be this one. Well, now we can get the average of that. So you can see you can manipulate data in between. And now what happens is the list is split out here. Each age comes to the variable and it then gets plus 5 on the age. And then now we get the average of the age plus then 5, right? So we get a higher average, which would be 38. Now, what actually happens here, we can see quite clearly with the explain flow. And if you ever get lost with the iterators and aggregators, you can always come down here and click the explain flow button. So you can see it comes here, splits out into 3 again. Then the first one is processed. Then that value is stored here. Second one is processed. That value is stored there. And then the third one is processed and that value is stored there. And then because we're doing an average, it knows that there's 3 things. So then it takes the sum of those values and divides by 3 to get the average. Let's have a quick look at our text aggregator. And where you might want to use that numeric aggregator might be for getting the average of ages, might be for summing up a total for all items ordered in a shopping cart. Next, we've got the text aggregator. Now, the text aggregator works in that you can basically create a simple array from a complex array. So here we've got our complex array, which, remember, a complex array is an array of objects where each object contains multiple things. We go back to our mirror board here. On the left was our complex array because it contained the name, the age, the hair color, etc. That was multiple data points for the object, for the contact. And then we had our simple array, which contained just one thing in that list, right? And in this case, it was a text. So here we can actually convert our complex array into a simple array or even a list of multiple simple arrays if we wanted to. So let's create a simple array of the name. And we'll also create a simple array of the age, because we can. We can see we get our iterator running again, doing the split. Now what happens is the first route is taken, and we get an output of our simple array. Now here we didn't actually tell the aggregator how we wanted that to be output. So what it did is it just created a text aggregation and just added them all together, just concatenated them together. And they're not separated by anything, so not the ideal way to do it. We can adjust that with the advanced settings, put in a row separator and choose a custom separator here, put in a comma, And now we'll have a comma-separated list of values. Here we'll do the same, and that will give us our comma-separated list again. So now when we look at our data, we'll have our comma-separated list, Tom, Harry, Susan, and then here we've got our comma-separated list of hair colors. But these are not arrays, the outputs. These are just simply strings. I know that because if I look at my output, I can see that there's no square bracket around the output. There's a square bracket here and here, but that's an array of outputs from this module. This is the first output object, but the actual output itself is not an array. So let's talk about how we might convert that into a simple array. Well, we can do that using a formula. We put the set variable here, and we'll use the array as the name. Now we're under the text function, and then we use the split function. And what this does is it takes our comma-separated list of values, in this case, Tom, Harry, Susan, and then it splits those values, those texts, into separate texts and then holds them within a list. So here we need to then tell it how we want it to split it. We've separated those things with a comma, so we just put comma in here as our option to split by. And so we'll just run that through, and we're doing the same split again. We're doing the aggregation, and then here we've got our array. Now you can see how the data is different, right? So here the output was horizontal because it's a string. When it is correctly formatted as a list, it will show vertically as a list, as like a checklist. Now with that, we can then do another iteration of that list because now it is an array that we can iterate, right? We can select that here. We can't do an iteration of the text. We've put our text in as our iteration, and it even says that it's a text here. But because it's not a true array, a true list, we need to convert that text into an array first, which is what we did in this step here with the split function. And now when we map that array into our iteration, we will then get each one of those separated out, right? Tom, Harry, Susan, right? So that's how you can convert a simple array or a comma-separated string into a simple array, and then a simple array process that in iteration module as well. Okay, so enough of the theory for arrays and iterators. Let's actually put this into a real world use case. So here I've got my daily news listener or feed for topics that I care about, right? So pretty simple scenario. Essentially what happens is I have a list of topics. I then call my news API. I then put the top 5 articles for each of those topics into a text, and I send myself an email once a day. So pretty simple. Let's break down how this all works. Now here we've got our topics. I'm interested in Chat, GPT, Bubble.io, and Make.com. And what I'm doing here is I've got my 3 topics, could be as many as I like, and I've put those as a text string separated by commas, and then I'm splitting that text string into an array of strings. So I'm going to have object 1, which will be ChatGPT, then Bubble.io, then Make.com. So 3 objects in this array. Now, what will happen is the first object, let's say ChatGPT, goes here into the news API, and I'll change my API key after this video. I'm feeding in the topic here as the query parameter, the Q. I'm sorting by the most recent, and I'm also filtering to the English language. Then what gets returned is a list of relevant articles to my query and my query parameters. So I'm actually iterating within an iteration here. And you can stack up iterations and aggregations and sort of iterate and aggregate and iterate again and do that as many times as you like within an iteration or within an aggregation. You can put them wherever you want in the logic. Now we can see here I'm iterating my articles. So here I've got my array of 4 articles, and then I'm splitting those out into 4 separate bundles of data. Right. And then I'm saying, well, I only care about the top 5, the 5 most recent articles. Let's just put that in. We'll do page size. I'm just going to put a limit here of, I think I'll just limit it to maybe 5. And I'm going to change my sort to popularity. And then I might also put in a date value. Now, the benefit of having this sort of logic of iterating the topics is that I only now have one module that I need to change the data on. If I was to not iterate the topics here, I would have to do each of these calls separately, which would mean I would have to have multiple of these in logic, right? And then for each one of those, I would then have to change my parameters, which that may be how you want to do it. If you want to change the parameters depending on the topic that you're calling, then you'd want to do it that way. But here I'm using the exact same parameter each time. So I'll just put in today's date, and I'm going to format that. And then I'm going to manipulate that date before I format it. That's very important, that you do it before you format. If you do it after you format, well, now you're trying to manipulate a text and you're not manipulating a date. So here I want to just add days. And then here you can put a negative value, which I'll do here, -7, because I want to get the articles in the most popular in the last, let's say maybe 3 days. And then I'm formatting it into the format that they want. I'm just going to unlink that there, and I'm just going to put a variable there for now, just so I don't send myself a billion emails whilst I test this. And now let's run our scenario. We can see we've got our 3 bundles of topics. Then we call our news API 3 separate times, and we return a maximum of 5 articles. Now I'm iterating the articles here, and I'm doing that per topic because I want to then use my text aggregator to then create just a kind of a structured email here. So I'm going to map for each article that I care about. I'm going to map the title, the description, the URL. Now the description could possibly be quite long. Let's have a look at these. Actually, it looks like they're truncating the description already for me. The content here is not truncated, and you can see here that it actually says there's more characters there. So if we download the output bundles, we should be able to see, oh, okay, so that's actually just how they're pushing in the data. I thought they might be truncating it and telling us how many characters were left, but that's just how the API's returned it. It's probably a setting in the API that I could change with that I get the full article if I wanted it. So here I've got the title, I've got the description, and then I've got the URL link that I can then click so I can go read the full article if I want. And I know it says deleted there or removed. That's because this particular article that was iterated to then basically prime this iteration module, that article's values actually said deleted in 1970, right? So that's actually the correct values there. It's just the article itself had been removed by the author. So now I've created my text format here, and we can preview how that looks. So you can see here's all my input data. And now I'm formatting that into this sort of text string here, title, description, and then URL. And that should be okay. I could put some HTML in here if I wanted to. So what I'm doing here is I've got my list of articles structured, and that's per topic. And then I want to then just add the title for each topic at the top of those articles. So it will say OpenAI, then I'll have article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then it will have make.com, article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So I'm iterating and then aggregating the articles per topic. Then I'm aggregating all the topics plus the aggregated articles per topic in this aggregation module. Now here we can see that we've got the gray outlines, and the gray outlines can stack on top of each other. And you can see here, this first aggregation module is just taking data from that green iteration module, right? That's the only data that it sees and that is available to it. Then this module here, it sees everything within the gray box right the way down to this first iteration module. It only sees the output data from our aggregation module there, which is this here. There's no way for it to see the data within the iterated aggregation. If we weren't aggregating there, well, then it would see everything from the iteration and you could do something else with it. Now I'm going to put in my HTML again here, H1s in there. And then this already has our HTML tag in it. I think I'll be fine there without a break, but I do want to put some line breaks on the bottom here just to separate these. And if you don't know how to write HTML, that's fine. You could use a text to HTML model, or you could just put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, format this to HTML so it looks nice, and then copy out codes, and then you can add that into your logic. So here's our output. Now, if you've ever wondered with the outputs why you're not seeing all these other modules, well, remember when I said that everything within this gray area is not visible, and that's because it's aggregated. So everything within that gray box is aggregated into that final module's output. And if you don't save them, or if you don't format them and put them into something, then it's lost, right? You can't access it. You could, if you wanted, have a data store in here, or use some variable or something like that to temporarily store the data, and then you can call it back. Or you can do multiple aggregations to then save different parts of it. You can do all of that, or you can save it into databases and then recall databases data later. But here we don't really care about any of that. We just want to see the text. So let's run this now. And we can see that we've got our 3 topics. Each topic then iterated its articles, and then we had 9 articles in total. There would have been 5 times 3, but not all the topics had 5 articles. Then here we had our outputs of those articles, and then we had our aggregation of the articles per type. So we can see ChatGPT, Bubble didn't have anything, Make didn't have anything. And what I could do, I suppose, if I wanted to clean that up, I could just say, look, if the article count for the bundle is less than 0, well, then don't include it in the result. So you could do that as well. You just do, in this case, articles array length is greater than 0, then it would give it in the result. The reason why we're doing that is because we've got this funny sort of bubble in the middle that's hanging with no data. So if we rerun that now, we'll only get 2 of those topics passing our filter, which means now when we're aggregating, we'll only get the ChatGPT, and then we should get the make.com one here. And now, because this has got HTML in it, I need to use the HTML body and not the text body. I'm going to run that now so that I can see what that looks like. So I should get that into my email now. Here it is. So we can see here we've got H1, H2, 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 and then this is body, and then we've got the link there. So now I should be able to click those links because Google automatically formats them. Looks like this one was a dud link. That one there. So we also dud link because it's consent. Looks like Yahoo's got some weird thing going on with their Yahoo News. But this one here works fine. And for my use case, that should be okay. Now, you could do something similar with sort of Google News, etc., but this gives you a little bit more flexibility in how you work with the data, how you format the data. Maybe you don't want to just send an email. Maybe you want to draft up some tweets or some Facebook posts or send the data to your WordPress website instead, right? Maybe you want to filter it a bit more so that you're not getting Yahoo data. So you could add all that logic into your logic inside of Make and then get a nice clean output at the end of the day. For me, this should be pretty sufficient because I'm really just trying to keep up to date with the latest news on these 3 apps that I use. And then I'll open up these articles, have a quick read, pull in some key information, and then create an email from it if I need to.